Welcome to the 163rd edition of Europe Calling. Today, in cooperation with the German Society for Eastern European Studies, my name is Maximilian Fries. I'm the Managing Director of Europe Calling, and I'm moderating this evening together with Volker Weichsel, editor of the magazine Osteuropa. I would especially like to welcome our guest for today's discussion. I'll briefly share my screen so that everyone can see what the program looks like this evening. We're going to start with a brief introduction by Volker. After that, we'll have the 4 input statements. Rashanik from People in Need, Thomas de Waal, Carnegie Europe, Narek, Sukiasyan, American University of Armenia, and then Robin Wagener as a coordinator of the federal government, also responsible for the Southern Caucasus. He's certainly going to tell us more about this. And at the end, we have some time for questions, as well as our discussion. A few housekeeping rules, as always. You can ask questions and rate the questions of others. That's very important. We have over 600 registrations, so we want to filter out the questions that are of most interest. We're going to be posting the link into the chat now. You can also scan the QR code. And as always, this webinar is going to be recorded and will be published on YouTube and on a podcast. So if you mention your name, please consider this. And if need be, only use your first name or another name. That will be it for now. I'd also like to thank our supporting members that make Europe Calling possible. We are donated by donations, or we're funded by donations and crowdfunding. Without you, we wouldn't exist. So thank you very much for that. Without further ado, we're going to give Volker Weichsel the floor. Volker? Thank you very much, Max. We decided to get together here on a day where we are the sad witnesses of a sad event. Today, yesterday, and over the next days, a century-long presence of Armenian life in Azerbaijan is going to end in Nagorno-Karabakh. We are going to see what the population lived like in Nagorno-Karabakh. Years ago, it was 120,000 people. At the moment, 70,000, and it's an offensive displacement taking place after Azerbaijan, after they lived there, after 2 wars in 2020, and now a week ago, all possibilities for self-defense, all institutions of autonomy that this population had built up was militarily destroyed, and this led to the exodus of the population. We're going to see in a few days that there will practically no Armenians left in this area of Nagorno-Karabakh. What region are we talking about? For years now, we've been the witness of more and more catastrophes, refugee flows everywhere. And for that reason, allow me to briefly say something about the region for all of those that have lost track of all the areas where we have become witness of misery. We are in the Southern Caucasus with Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And on the territory of Azerbaijan during Soviet times, from 21 till 91, since the fall, or before the fall of the Soviet Union, we had the autonomous region of Nagorno-Karabakh, where autonomous Armenians lived. Azerbaijanis also lived there, and they declared their independence. And then a war broke out, which the Armenians won with the support of Soviet Russia. Back then, many people from Azerbaijan were displaced. There was ethnic cleansing on both sides. And since 1994, there has been a year-long ceasefire. In 2020, Azerbaijan waged a successful 44-day war and reconquered the territory and thereby entirely changed the geopolitical situation. And since then, it's clear that Azerbaijan is threatening this population massively. On the one hand, we have the territorial integrity and the state's sovereignty, but on the other side, of course, we have the obligation of every state to protect the population of its area. There's a duty to protect, and this also includes protecting the rights and the security of minorities. And over the last years, since this war, up until the last minute, a week ago, Azerbaijan promised representatives of European politics to have done everything to mediate. It promised that this population would be offered security and that there would be no military attack. And then this military attack ensued nevertheless with the support of Turkey and with the basic authorization of Russia, who formerly protected Armenia. So we have this displacement taking place now. And I have to say that the situation is even worse. We have the humanitarian suffering of these people that are now being displaced and who are arriving in Armenia. But the situation goes even further. There's a big risk that Azerbaijan, together with Turkey, will use the situation in order to build a corridor. This here is an exclave of Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan now claims southern Armenia. There's a possibility of a corridor that they might fully control, or they might also try to control the whole territory. So we're not only the sad witnesses of this ethnic cleansing, there's also the political task to avoid a further aggression against the Republic of Armenia. And that is also why, well, it isn't a discussion. I think it is not a time where we discuss, it's rather a briefing of what needs to be done, and we want to proceed in 3 different steps. We invited from Goris, as can be seen here on the map, if Max can show us. Shoshanik Nersesyan is amongst us. She works for the NGO People in Need. And for months now, she's been helping those people that were locked out of Karabakh because Azerbaijan closed down the only connecting route, and they could no longer go back after having been in Armenia to buy medical supplies or others. So these people fleeing are helped here by this NGO, and Shoshanik Nersesyan has helped out massively. And Goris is the location where these 10,000s of displaced have had to go through fleeing to Armenia. It's briefly after the border, and Shoshanik is going to tell us more about the situation there. After that, Tom de Waal is going to tell us more. For 30 years now, he's been the best and most important expert as a political scientist, as a journalist, but also when it comes to all matters relating to the diplomatic negotiations for Nagorno-Karabakh. And today he is here, and all of his efforts haven't yielded the fruit desired. Then Narek Sukiasyan is going to take the floor. He's going to comment from Armenia, and he's going to give us a political insight into the situation of Armenia. He's going to tell us more about the geopolitical questions, the role of Russia and Turkey. And before you can all ask your questions, we will hear more from Robin Wagner, coordinator of the Federal Republic for South Caucasus. We're going to discuss what needs to be done. We are going to discuss what can be done to stop Azerbaijan launching another offensive. What can the international community do to avoid this? I'd say that we now give the floor to Shoshanik so that we can find out more about the situation in Goris, what the situation looks like between the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh and Goris, what is going on along the street on the 27th of September. Shoshanik, please, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Actually, I'm really very thankful to have this opportunity to raise what is happening here in Goris these days, in Armenia especially. And thank you organizers for this awareness among international society. As it's really very sad to say, even People in Need Czech organization, one of the reasons for being established almost 30 years ago, one of the reasons was, again, the war in 1992, when Czech journalists just decided to come here in the region and help those people who are suffering from war. We would really be very very happy not to have this opportunity to operate here in Armenia and operate only in other countries and to do only the development jobs. But unfortunately, since 2020, our organization is doing everything to help people who are really in need because of the conflict. And now, again, helping from 2020 and helping during the blockade and helping even that days with our awareness when it was the shelling in Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, when the Latin corridor is only one way open for people to flee there and to come to Armenia, we are here in Goris, which is our second office of People in Need in Armenia, and trying to help these people however we can, actually, because it's really a very emergency situation, and you can't imagine people are coming without shoes, without blankets, without anything to eat, and the road is taking over 24 and more hours to come here. I'm just sorry to be emotional because just a few meters from me, when I'm sitting in the office, it's 24 hours, people are standing there. And what is actually happening here? So they are coming, and the government in Armenia is registering them to reallocate them throughout the regions of Armenia. And here we, as People in Need, are helping them just with food, with clothing, with referrals, where to go, how to find the place where you have to be registered. And it's really very sad to hear their stories and, to try to make awareness, because no one really wants to tell their story, because these people are really broken and they left their homes and they are just coming here having nothing. And now People in Need is just putting all the efforts, all the funds possible to help them for now as an emergency, and also to try to find some long-term solutions for them. People in Need headquarter organization also came up with the SOS Armenia appeal. So we are having a big fundraising campaign throughout Europe just to raise money to come with the solutions, because by daily, in our view, we are there standing with these people in Goris, which is actually the first checkpoint when we meet them in their needs. And we are collecting the needs and just registering and sorting it out and finding out the ways how can we help them. We coordinate with the local authorities just to be really very fast and respond and not to duplicate whatever is happening with the ICRC or with the governmental support. Maybe this much very shortly. Sorry for being very emotional, but yeah, if there are some more details you want me to ask, you want me to answer from here from Goris, I'm happy to answer it.
Thank you, Shoshana. There will definitely be more questions from the audience. So for now, I switch to Tam. Please, Tam, give us a broad overview of where we stand now and what, from your point of view, is to do immediately.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Volker. Thank you for this invitation. Let me just, I think we have to start with a little background, but I'll try and be quick. I mean, obviously what we're seeing is a tragedy. We're seeing the end of Armenian Karabakh, basically. Thousands of people fleeing. It's not clear how many will flee, but probably it's quite likely that the majority of the population will flee to Armenia. And we're seeing the kind of ending through force of a conflict that began 35 years ago, and there's been so many attempts for diplomacy and negotiations to solve it, but it's ended in force and flight of the Karabakhi population. So I guess there will be many post-mortems about who is to blame, and a lot of people obviously are to blame. But the brutal reality is that force won. Azerbaijan launched the military operation, and diplomacy ultimately failed. Where do we begin? Well, obviously we don't want to go right back to the beginning, but up until 2020, of course, the Armenian side, let us not forget, was in a dominant position and made many miscalculations when they were in a dominant position and occupied Azerbaijani land and had opportunities to compromise, but didn't take those opportunities. Then in 2020, obviously, Azerbaijan went back to war, reconquered all its lost territories and indeed part of Karabakh as well. And since then, of course, Karabakh has been basically isolated with just the Lachin road connecting it to Armenia, and only Russian peacekeepers as the guarantors of the security of the Karabakh Armenians. I think the Ukraine war was absolutely critical. Russia was weakened. Russia decided that Azerbaijan was a very important partner for it, and also was more suspicious of the Armenian government of Nikol Pashinyan. And so when Azerbaijan decided to close the Lachin corridor last December and then put a checkpoint on it in April, the Russians basically stood by. They did nothing. They allowed basically a siege of Karabakh to take place. And so we've had the siege of Karabakh all this year, despite even a judgment from the International Court of Justice telling Azerbaijan to open the road. And simultaneously, we've had negotiations, and it's almost as though all this year we've seen a competition between will force prevail or will negotiations prevent the use of force? And it's at various points, one's been a little more optimistic or pessimistic, while aware that this sword has been hanging over this conflict all the time. And then I think we obviously saw an intensification over the summer, both of negotiations and the threat of force. And I think the tragedy is that there was so much diplomacy going on over the summer, both from the US and the EU talking to Azerbaijan, trying to say to Azerbaijan not to do this, from Russia, which was playing its own game, and also negotiations actually on the ground. But I think there were secret negotiations, but I think in time we will hear more about it. And I've been told that basically the Karabakh Armenians basically in these secret meetings had basically agreed to basically Azerbaijan's demands, that by the 12th of September, one of these meetings, the Karabakh Armenians said, yes, we will return to Azerbaijan. There needs to be a transitional period. Give us some time, but we agree basically to all your demands. What happened then on the 19th of September? Well, I think we have to look to Russia clearly as the determining factor. The fact that when the operation came in, several things happened on the Russian side. First of all, the peacekeepers did nothing. They stood down. Secondly, Russia did not condemn the operation. And thirdly, Russia started condemning, there was a very coordinated campaign, this has actually been written about in some of the Russian media, a coordinated campaign to blame Nikol Pashinyan, the Armenian Prime Minister, for this, and not Azerbaijan. So it seems to be a part of a geopolitical pivot in which Russia has switched its traditional partner in the Caucasus, Armenia, for Azerbaijan. And a deal has been done between Moscow and Baku. The West has been sidelined. The Azerbaijanis basically get to take over Karabakh. Possibly there will be some kind of Armenian presence in Stepanakert, which will justify the Russian peacekeepers remaining, but the rest of Karabakh will come under complete Azerbaijani control very quickly. And Russia, and we're obviously seeing this tragic scenes of thousands of people fleeing to Armenia, and clearly it's Russia's intention that this causes regime change in Armenia. I think this is obviously the next stage to look at. Volker's mentioned the issue of Zangezur, Sunik, that I think that's to watch as well, but I think but maybe for later, I think what we need to watch now is attempts at regime change in Armenia, instigated by Russia, to bring in a more pro-Russian government. I think, ironically, of course, I'm sure many Armenians are extremely angry with Pashinyan for the many mistakes he's made, but perhaps the fact that this Russian pressure is so obvious may be the thing that helps him, because if they're angry with Pashinyan, maybe they're even more angry with Russia. But very unstable days coming in Armenia. And unfortunately, a choice by Azerbaijan that basically, and you could say Turkey as well, that they had a choice to kind of to help Pashinyan to continue the negotiating track, to strengthen Armenia, and try and free Armenia from the Russian influence. That was one choice they had. Or they had a choice to go with Russia on this course of destabilizing Armenia, having a weak Armenia, and kind of trying to claim this regional hegemony in the South Caucasus with a weak Armenia. And unfortunately, they seem to be choosing the second option at the moment. Why don't I stop there? I'm sure many things for discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tom. We'll definitely come back to the point who is to blame, because after February 22 in the European Union and in Germany, and everybody said lessons learned, just negotiations without any negotiation force do not serve. Then violence and force will make the game, and I fear that what we did again, we will talk about this later, but you mentioned that Russia is trying to instigate a regime change in Armenia, and the situation in Armenia itself and the role of Russia. This is something Narek should definitely tell us about. What's the situation directly in Yerevan, and what is your perspective on the conflict?
Thank you for having me, and thank you to the other contributors for their remarks. I especially want to thank Shushanik and People in Need for the extraordinary work that they do. I've seen their work personally, and it just deserves nothing but praise, and their efforts need to be supported. That I think you can also do in the link provided in the announcement of this event, which I highly encourage you to do. Just to chip in a couple more points on the humanitarian situation. By today in the morning, we had already over 40,000 refugees crossing into Armenia from Karabakh, and these people are refugees because they are forcefully displaced from their homes from their country, and they do cross a border. As a result of the unprovoked full-scale aggression by Azerbaijan against Karabakh, we have different reports of the number of the casualties dead among the soldiers. The official number for now reported is 200, but my own reports coming from Karabakh among the doctors is several-fold higher than this. even the communication, even the collecting information is very complicated, because as Azerbaijan started the operation, the attack, they damaged immediately the communication lines, the phone cables, the internet connection. Also, their incursions into Karabakh, controlled by Armenians, cut the road lines connecting the remote areas of Karabakh to its center, Stepanakert. And therefore, for a few days, we did not have any information from Martakert and Martoni regions, and we did not know how many dead people are there. At some point, the facilities where they keep the dead bodies were so full that they would keep the bodies of dead soldiers in school gyms. So we're still unaware of the scale of this catastrophe that happened. On top of this, we have civilian deaths among civilians, including women and children. And we still have no idea about the extent of this catastrophe. When it comes to this on the humanitarian side of things, and this, of course, comes after 10 months of starvation of this population. So you can imagine there's very limited fuel, if any. So even the ambulance could not get to trenches to collect the bodies of wounded. And they were left to blood, and maybe their lives could have been saved, but it was impossible. Going now to some of the diplomatic or geopolitical things around this, Mr. Dewald rightly pointed out the failure of compromises and the failure of diplomacy for over 30 years. However, I want to stress one point that is often overlooked and very often also used by Azerbaijan, that Armenia did not agree to a peace deal, Armenia did not agree to concessions, and therefore we had to solve this by a military way. First of all, Azerbaijan itself committed not to resort to use of force or threat of force, so that is already a violation. However, there were a number of instances in this 30-year-old long settlement process where the mediators, US, France, and Russia tabled settlement peace plans, and Armenia did agree, and Azerbaijan turned them down. At least we have at least two diplomatically available public evidences of this, one being in Key West in 2001, mediated by US, and another in Kazan in 2011, mediated by Russia. Armenian sides have said also publicly that they have agreed to these agreements, but these were turned down by Azerbaijan. So this narrative tends to legitimize Azerbaijan's use of force, which they justify as they were not able to get their maximalist demands, and it's not that there was no possibility of compromise. Now getting to why this became possible. This was very, very predictable. Experts both in Armenia and whoever works on this from any point of the world have been ringing the alarm bells that this is coming. However, those calls were not taken seriously for a number of reasons. But what I want to stress as one of the reasons that maybe even enabled this Azerbaijani attack was the lack of proper pressure on Baku and proper deterrence, diplomatic deterrence on Azerbaijan, which was rather open about its ambitions. Just a few days before the attack started, we had Undersecretary of US Yuri Kim briefing the US Foreign Relations Committee about the situation in Karabakh, and she explicitly said that we will not, and I quote, "we will not tolerate a military attack against Karabakh." This means that you put a cost at those actions. However, we saw that Karabakh was attacked by Azerbaijan blatantly, and there were no signs of how US did not tolerate that. The same goes to EU, to European capitals. None of this, no effort was put in place to prevent this, but all of this was preventable. There is no pressure, there's practically no pressure on Azerbaijan other than concerns, condemnations, and phone calls. However, the West has all the leverages to affect the situation in a positive way by constraining, by restraining the authoritarian, if not dictatorial regime in Baku. The vast amount of Azerbaijani economy depends on its hydrocarbon exports to European Union, and it only provides from 1 to 3% of European needs. However, Europe finds itself for some magical reason at dependence from Azerbaijan and not vice versa. Until recently, there were 7 countries that import Azerbaijani oil and gas. Now, very soon, there will be 10. So instead of putting more pressure, instead of limiting these factors that enable Azerbaijan's attacks, we just see them grow more and more. There may be even under this backdrop of this catastrophe, or this tragedy of these people fleeing Karabakh, there may be this fatigue that at least at the cost of this catastrophe, the conflict is over. But it's not. It's unfortunately not. Azerbaijan continues with at least 3 key demands, three maximalist demands from Armenia, and has complete support of Turkey in this. The first demand is the demand of so-called Zangezur corridor. Can you show the map, please, Max, of southern Armenia, if there is any? Azerbaijan demands a land corridor from its mainland part to Nakhichevan exclave on the territory of Armenia, and it wants it to be it wants it to be a sovereign corridor. So basically, a line on the white part of Armenia, yes, connecting Azerbaijan with Nakhichevan, and both sides it is on the left, on the right you have Azerbaijan. However, they want this not under Armenia's control. Moreover, the ceasefire agreement after the 2020 war stipulates that Russian FSB forces should be standing here. Armenia has offered since 2020 3 roads, 3 checkpoints connecting mainland Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan to be as normal international transit routes as you travel from your country to a different country. However, Azerbaijan turned this down, and they want this corridor. And to illustrate this further, imagine where is US, where is Canada and Alaska, and imagine US demanding from Canada, cutting a road from itself, gifting it to US so US can connect to Alaska. So it's a complete absurd demand. However, they have tried in previous years to achieve this demand, to fulfill this demand by military force. Since 2020, Azerbaijan has attacked large scale, at least 3 times, against the Republic of Armenia, not Karabakh, sovereign territory of Armenia, occupying over 400 square kilometers of Armenian land, from which most of those are strategic heights. So they oversee the strategic roads of Armenia, and they have shown no intention of withdrawing from those territories, even though there were condemnations of these actions by the EU and the US. However, those things do not function with Baku. So the next threat is going to come in the direction of Armenia south in order to get this corridor. Russia has its own interest here because it may get a chance to put its security services here and continue increasing its leverages over the region. Next, we have other territorial demands from Azerbaijan enclaves. So these are basically islands that belonged to each of the Soviet republics of Armenia and Azerbaijan. I mean, I will need a more detailed map to explain.
Okay, let's at this point.
Yeah, so it's basically on practical terms. Again, this is nothing but an unconstructive way to pressure Armenia further and to get those territories that connect Armenia with Georgia and Iran, because those roads pass through those villages. And my last point that I wanted to make, the last demand that Azerbaijan continues making, is that they recently created a community, an organization called Community of Western Azerbaijan. which claims to represent Azerbaijani population that used to live in Armenia in Soviet times, and they demand their full return. But this is not some sort of humanitarian resettlement of refugees, but full territorial claims over Armenia, because if you turn the TV in Baku, the state television, and after the news show, you see the weather report, you will see the weather being reported from Western Azerbaijan, showing Armenia's map and claiming and giving Azeri names to Armenian cities. Ilham Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, and I'm quoting him, said that it is our political and strategic objective to return those lands. Armenia is historic Azerbaijan, and we will do everything to return. So, it's unthinkable. It's unacceptable to think that the situation ends here, and the international community has all the obligation to put the maximum diplomatic, if not economic, pressure on Azerbaijan in forms of sanctions to prevent what is to follow. Otherwise, this happened on the watch of the international community. A region was depopulated in an ethnic cleansing, and it can continue.
Unfortunately, I have totally to confirm what Narek says. We see a campaign in Baku preparing the population for the same thing Russia did in February 2002 towards Ukraine. They are preparing with this Western Azerbaijan term, the same situation. This is our land. They are preparing mentally an attack on Armenia by justifying this with historical reasons. And this is why we have to switch to Robin Wagner. Und ich gehe jetzt auch nochmal ins Deutsche.
I'll now switch to Robin Wagner and speak German. Tom de Waal wrote yesterday that European politics has failed. We have the different pillars. The European Foreign Service tried to implement diplomacy, and the European Commission at the same time continued negotiating with Azerbaijan. Is this changing? What is the responsibility of the Commission and of the Commission President von der Leyen? What options do Berlin have? What can France do? And what could be the role of the United Nations? We'll have to think about that in our analysis. We'll have to think about what could have been done, where we could have reacted differently. In its actions hitherto, Germany tried to go down the diplomatic route, also with regards to the peace negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We have to take note that Azerbaijan didn't keep the promises it made, also vis-à-vis us in this context. We'll be able to analyze all of that in due course, but what I consider more important now is to take a look at what help is particularly important at the moment. And that's not me escaping the discussion. It's going to have to take place, but at the moment, we find ourselves in an acute situation that we have to react to. The situation is dramatic. This has been described by the other speakers. People that are fleeing and are faced with a loss of their home. They're faced with a loss of their hope. This has been replaced by fear. We also just heard what is being said in the media in Azerbaijan. And of course, people are fleeing. 50,000 people have already fled from Nagorno-Karabakh. Of course, the situation is dramatic for families being split up, for children. And this isn't something that happened all of a sudden. In November 21, there was a ceasefire. And then in May, fire broke out again. In 2022, there was an Azerbaijan blockade. And this can be clearly said. Azerbaijan closed down the corridor or blocked it since last December. And in doing so, it caused a humanitarian catastrophe in Nagorno-Karabakh. Troops were pooled, and then the military offensive started. The time will come where we'll have to ask the question, what could have been done differently? The hope of the German government was to go down the diplomatic route. The promises were broken. Now, of course, the question is, how do we react? Azerbaijan is responsible for the rights and the security of the remaining people in Nagorno-Karabakh. For this, of course, transparency in Nagorno-Karabakh is important. An important step in this direction would be to allow international observers. That is a demand to allow such international observers. Baku has said that UN observers could be allowed. That would be an important step. But again, generally speaking, it's important to have transparency. When it comes to international observers, we shouldn't forget that Russian troops are still there. They too must fulfill their role. They're remarkably passive at the moment. A lot has been said about the potential interests that lie behind that, but the obligation remains. And then there's humanitarian aid, which remains important for the people remaining in Nagorno-Karabakh, but it's also important for the many, many people that are fleeing. And we have to understand the situation. They fled from a situation where over the last months, they lacked food and medical supplies. The federal government, as a means of the International Committee of the Red Cross, it stocked these means up. We now have 5 million, and the European Union is also helping in the area of humanitarian aid. It is important for this to happen now, which is why also the decision was taken to increase the help. Of course, there is a possibility for further escalation, and that is why it is important to tell Azerbaijan that it is unacceptable to use military means in a running peace process, and that it would be unacceptable to have a further escalation, and that everything would now have to be settled via peace negotiations. And we have to examine whether we could have a European answer. Part of the European process is to examine a potential reply, including sanctions. So it's important to keep an eye on this and to ensure that such escalations do not take place without any consequences. And it needs to be clarified and clearly stated on all channels that a further escalation is unacceptable. Now, with regard to the peace negotiations, they are an important step that needs to carry on. Also with regards to the question of the rights of the people that remain in Nagorno-Karabakh. But there's also the question relating to the people fleeing. And Charles Michel is conducting negotiations. This has already led to a number of discussions, and we hope for progress, and both sides have declared wanting to take part in this process, of course, also in close cooperation and alignment with the American discussions that are being held. This brings me to my last point. Here too, worries have been expressed that I can only share. It needs to be clear that no country in this world has the right to use the current situation in order to destabilize the democratic government of Armenia. I said it, I'm worried about the passive approach of the Russian troops. But there's also the statements from the Russian Ministry for Foreign Affairs that go down the same road. And in this situation, it is important that we help the Armenian society as much as we can. This is a country that has also decided to more intensively work together with the West, and that is why it is important that it becomes visible that such a decision also leads to a reaction from the West. From the German perspective, we now have the bilateral development cooperation that has 18 million earmarked for it. And here we have to see how we can continue progressing with this, and that is currently happening. Grants for SMEs, promotion of renewable energy, legal advice, administrative reforms, all these things are happening. Now, these sound like steps that might not be a good match for a direct situation of crisis. And this also sounds like small steps, but I am convinced, and this is also the feedback I'm getting from Armenia, I'm convinced that these steps are very important, that it's important to expand the cooperation between our countries, to expand financial support for Armenia. And being able to celebrate successes is important to ensure the situation in the country is stabilized. And I think this too must be an area of focus. We also have the civil EU mission on the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and it certainly helps build trust. And it is important to continue focusing, perhaps even strengthening these types of missions. So various steps that are extremely important now. And in the future, I'm more than happy to have discussions about the question, what could have been done differently? But for now, I think it's important to see what can be done immediately, how we need to react, and what steps need to be undertaken right away. Now, as a moderator, I do hope you'll forgive me for taking the floor. In my opinion, this is the wrong discourse. I think the question, what has been doing wrong, must lead to the question, what can we do now? And humanitarian aid is one important thing to do. But after Russia's war on Ukraine, we learned that receiving Ukrainians in Germany is one thing, but the massive support of Ukraine is the other side of the coin. And not taking a look at what has been done will merely lead to a continuation. That means we're having peace discussions, we offer development aid, but the result will be that the actual statement will be that we're not willing to use means to counter this violence. We're simply continuing along the same way. We want to negotiate, but if Azerbaijan decides to once again military means, we'll say, we'll talk about the reasons in a few years. Sorry for saying that as a moderator. Perhaps this could be rephrased into a question, and perhaps even Tom de Waal could say something about this before we respond to the questions of the audience. And Max tells us how we're going to continue with our webinar. Perhaps I can add to this. Firstly, thank you very much to all of you. I can complement this with the questions we've received from the audience. We have one question from Andreas Müller, who was asking, why isn't the West thinking about sanctions instead of buying Russian gas via Baku again? And then Marina asks, the economic realpolitik of the EU with the petrocracy of Azerbaijan probably plays a significant role in the political restraint. Are there reliable figures on what percentage of fossil energy from Azerbaijan is really relevant for the energy supply in the EU and Germany? And then there are many questions that go down the path of why aren't there more sanctions? So I'd be pleased if we could perhaps start with that. Tom, followed by Robin, and then of course the others too. So firstly, how would our panel react to this question? Tom?
Sure. Well, I think, you know, the trouble with being a 27-member union
Wir sind eine Union bestehend aus
is that you don't. It's very difficult to get unity. I think there are two problems here. One is European unity. There are different member states with different views. The other is a kind of what we call the silo effect in Brussels. That on one hand, Charles Michel, as President of the European Council, has been engaged in conflict diplomacy. On the other hand, you have other people in Brussels who have been engaged in, are engaged in all the issues with Azerbaijan as a transport and energy country. Obviously, those discussions need to happen, but there needs to be a conflict dimension to those discussions. This is where I think EU policy has been lacking. And obviously, we all recall the visit of Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to Baku last July 2022, where a deal was done to import Azerbaijani gas, and in her public statements, there was no mention of the words peace, conflict, Armenia. So there was a big missed opportunity there on the part of Brussels. So I think we will see a shift in EU policy towards Azerbaijan, if only because Azerbaijan is obviously now aligning itself more strongly with Russia. But I don't think on the EU level we're going to see sanctions. There could be some individuals named for certain, if it's proved, if proved that atrocities were committed in Karabakh, there could be called for investigations and prosecutions. But I think what we will see on the level of member states, I think a shift in attitude to Azerbaijan. I think there's been always this kind of default policy of equidistance between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And now that we see Armenia is a struggling democracy, and we see Azerbaijan launching this military operation in Karabakh, aligning itself with Russia, I think many member states will now be focusing their attention on supporting Armenia. And I think there's I'm not in Germany. I was in Germany a few weeks ago, as Volker knows. I think there's a shift going on in Germany on that. However, there are a few member states. Hungary is the most obvious one, which have a much more friendly attitude towards Russia and towards Azerbaijan. And we hear that there was a strong statement being prepared in Brussels to condemn Azerbaijan's act of aggression, but this was vetoed by Hungary. So, these are the realities, unfortunately, we're dealing with. So I think but one thing I can say, I think even if there are going to be problems in taking a tougher attitude to Azerbaijan, which I think is warranted, I think there will be much stronger support for Armenia from many member states and from Brussels. So even if there is going to be maybe a weaker response towards Azerbaijan, I think there's definitely a feeling that Armenia is vulnerable. Armenia is a democracy. Its government has a pro-Western orientation and deserves stronger support.
Volker, kannst du das gerne moderieren, wenn du magst?
Ja, dann gehen wir doch.
Volker, feel free to moderate. Now the audience and I asked some very, very strict questions. So we'll start with Robin, followed by Narek. Yeah, with regards to the sanctions, on the 20th of September, I said this publicly, that I think it is important to examine sanctions in this context. And I also just said that in EU circles, one is testing what the reaction could be. But I can't say what the result of this EU scrutiny exercise is going to be. And we just heard what the situation is like in the European Union. Thomas de Waal just spoke about it. I can only say what I've publicly said myself. I think it is important to continue examining the situation at an EU level. I'm convinced that the energy matters cannot lead to us staying silent vis-a-vis Azerbaijan. I just said how important it is to be explicit here and to continue with this examination. Now, the stabilization of the democratically elected government, it is important when it comes to, perhaps I misunderstood it, Volker, but my opinion is that we have to invest massively to support Armenia. And I thought that that is what I said beforehand. In my opinion, it is an incredibly important step to support this democracy. And I think that is what we need to do as Germany. And this certainly isn't a trivial question. On the contrary, this is a very important task. And I myself, in my role, consider this to be one of the most urgent tasks that I want to devote myself to. And I think it's important that we do this as Germany to stabilize this government, because we can see that the destabilization narrative is to be observed everywhere. There might be foreign interest in this. And I think it is important that this country remains stable, that there is trust in the government, and that it becomes visible that the decision to orientate yourself towards the West doesn't mean to everything collapsing, but that this decision also finds a response in the form of different measures. So it is important that we scrutinize what can be done to this end. That is something I consider extremely important. I also spoke of other steps. I also spoke about sanctions. I spoke about the required European response. I'm also not a magician, so I cannot say what the result of the European consultations will be, but I do think it's important to send clear signals to Azerbaijan that a further military escalation is unacceptable. And I also believe that the peace process continues to be important. It's also important for Armenia for things to be clarified in the framework of a peace process without there being further military escalation. So once again, my appeal is to continue with this peace process.
And sometimes I also wish that we have different ways of acting and that things were easier. But I mean, I'm just a realist, and I think I've outlined the next steps that we have to take. Well, I'm only a facilitator or moderator, but my point was that of course, measures that will bear fruit in 5 years or so, or 10 years, are important. Of course, we have a consensus about that. But if we have an acute destabilization of a region and country, then building democratic institutions for the longer term aren't useful. I'm not just talking about steps that are for 5 or 10 years. That's not what I mean. I am talking about measures that will bring visible benefits now, right now. And I said that a few times. I'll interrupt before we pass the floor to Narek. There was a point in the chat as well. And the question was that, just like with Ukraine, that Chancellor Scholz and others go to Armenia now, to make a clear statement and say that we are on Armenia's side here, and we support Armenia. Just a question to Narek, and then maybe afterwards to Robin. Is that something that would help? Would that be a good message, a useful message, that we're there to support Armenia? Maybe Narek first, and then the others on this.
Thank you, Max. Excellent question. Very much connected to what I wanted to say, and to build up on where Volker left. Armenia, it was the fighting in Karabakh did not stop, and the refugees have not yet left when Aliyev and Erdogan met 2 days ago in Yerevan, already discussing the Zangezur corridor that they demand from Armenia. Development aid, investment in sustainable economy, democracy help are not deterrents. They do not stop the armies, the militaries, of authoritarian rulers to attack countries. It has not worked. It is the failure of liberal international order that has never been liberal or international. Speaking about Scholz coming and theoretically telling support, it is important to look for ways in which Armenia can be supported, as Robin rightly pointed out. But Nancy Pelosi was here a year ago, exactly a year ago these days, right after Azerbaijan attacked Armenia, killing over 200 soldiers and occupying Armenian territories, not Karabakh, Armenia. And that were exact words that she said in Armenia's National Assembly, in Armenia's parliament. We're here to see the ways in which we can support Armenia. And apparently a year was not enough to support and to prevent. Maybe it was enough to mobilize some development aid and support Armenia's democracy. But Armenia is facing an existential security issue, not a development one. Coming to the development and humanitarian assistance, that is more than vital and crucial to be mobilized here, and is more than welcomed and appreciated that it comes from, especially and mostly, if not exclusively, from European capitals. US pledged today, if I'm not mistaken, 11 million. EU increased to 5 million, Germany to 5, Sweden to 1.5. Maybe I'm getting the numbers wrong, but this is amazing and needs to be there. But let me remind one thing. In 2008, when the war broke out in Georgia, Georgia accepted 133,000 refugees. In order to support Georgia to address their needs, the West, and particularly spearheaded by US, mobilized over $1 billion. Armenia is now receiving 120,000 Armenians from Karabakh, almost the same amount of the people, same number of people. If I combine all those numbers that I mentioned at the beginning, it won't be compiled together even 50 million. So it's not even the 5% of what is needed to be mobilized. Why sanctions are not applied? Yes, I will not add to that. If 7 countries were dependent on that and vetoing, now it will be 10 because Azerbaijan is increasing the number of suppliers. It wasn't only Hungary that vetoed. Bulgaria definitely also was against it. Italy had its own remarks, so that's why it didn't pass. But what the EU will do, I mean, Michel or Commission can do their own announcements. Today, Michel's office hosted talks between the sides, and the entire condemnation or the consequence they had for Azerbaijan is the following sentence. And I quote, "The EU reiterated in this context its position on Azerbaijan's military operation last week. No more word." So that's why there won't be action. I mean, there isn't even a proper condemnation. What sanctions? I was talking to EU officials close to Doi Voklar's office a few months ago. And when I was trying to raise awareness of these crimes that Azerbaijan commits, and for these diplomats, they knew better than me. So I'm asking, why do you tolerate this bullying? And I quote, they answered, when we tell these things to Aliyev, he says, his answer is, who won the war? Azerbaijan won the war. It has seen that it delivers results. It does not bring it to any responsibility. It does not bear any cost. That's why it will continue doing it. And they prefer talking to Azerbaijan, even if it results in this, than condemning it. Because if they condemn strongly or there is action, Azerbaijan just refuses to talk. Because it's a self-reliant country, it does not depend on anyone. It does not have international aid, development, or democracy aid as Armenia has to. 27 countries cannot agree on something. There will be a veto player, sure, okay. But Azerbaijan's regime has huge financial resources, family resources, money laundered in a number of European capitals. And individual countries can take action to freeze their financial assets in their countries. For this, you don't need to convince Hungary. Beyond this, US is not a 27 member states. They can do this themselves, US separately, but that is also not being done. So the consensus argument doesn't work here.
Narek?
That's it.
Ja. Vielen Dank. Will noch jemand jetzt da?
Thank you. So this entire topic, sanctions and immediate consequences for Azerbaijan. Anyone on this? Robin and anyone else? So Robin again, and then I would like to ask some questions from the audience on other topics. Robin, please. Not on the question of sanctions. I mean, I've already talked on that, but the specific question to me, showing presence in Armenia, I believe that that could be one part of the solution, and I think that could be important to show Western presence in Armenia to send the signal. And then with all the measures for stabilization that I mentioned, there's another point that might be important for the territorial integrity of Armenia. We have the EU mission on the spot. I think that is an instrument that should be strengthened as well, which is one part of stabilizing the democratic society and government in Armenia. I'd mentioned it before, but I think it got lost. This EU mission in Armenia is important too. And I think that it has been important to build faith between Armenia and the West, say. So, EU mission, Armenia, I would like to ask Narek and Shoshanik about this when it's their turn again, but just let's look at a few questions from the audience on the role of Georgia. Torben, for instance, is asking, I'm going to read this out in English.
Georgian government and the Georgian population seem to show largely no interest in the humanitarian situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. Is it because Georgia itself is involved in the territorial conflicts with Russia over Abkhazia and South Ossetia?
It's a question for Tom.
And a question from Professor Hubertus Janus, who's actually Jan, who's a professor in the University of Cambridge. He asks, what is the role of Ruben Vardanyan, who was arrested today, in the current crisis? How seriously should we take concerns raised yesterday in Abkhazia and South Ossetia about Russia being a reliable protector of the status? So the role of the situation in Georgia to get the wider view here was asked. Maybe Tom, I'd assume.
Sure. I mean, it's always a bit disappointing that there's the South Caucasus is a region, but as we know, a rather dysfunctional region, and you know, the general reaction in Georgia has been rather indifferent to what's going on, even though it's their close neighbors. There seems to be Georgians seem to pay more attention to Ukraine than what's going on next door in Karabakh. I mean, of course, that's not true. That's a generalization. There are many Georgians who aren't interested. But I think we've also seen over the years, you know, many years of partnership between various Georgian and Azerbaijani governments, and obviously a lot of shared infrastructure and energy cooperation between Georgia and Azerbaijan, and for sure, I think there's something to watch. If Azerbaijan is aligning itself now more strongly with Russia, that's certainly bad for Georgia, which is already having problems with its European aspirations. The question about Abkhazia, South Ossetia, I think for sure Abkhaz and South Ossetians will also be asking themselves what are Russia's security guarantees to us. So maybe Russia, you know, is playing geopolitical games. It will abandon us one day. So I think that's definitely a question. About Ruben Vardanyan, maybe Narek has a comment. He's played a rather I don't know, dark role in this whole process. He arrived suddenly from Russia. He set himself up in Karabakh. And he seemed to be in contact with various circles in Russia. People were speculating that he might be using Karabakh as a launch pad for political ambitions in Armenia. But now we hear he's been arrested by the Azerbaijanis. So he's certainly not a popular figure either with the Armenian government or with the Azerbaijani government. So I think neither the Armenian government is not going to call very loudly for his release.
I don't want to focus too much on that particular case because I don't think it's the primary urgency of between these issues that we have. But what we can take from there is that this person was arrested at the checkpoint, fleeing from Karabakh to Armenia, and he was arrested. Azerbaijan has this made-up list of war criminals or other sorts of criminals that ranges in several hundreds. This is concerning pretty much anyone who they consider terrorist or a guerrilla fighter, which is virtually every Armenian man in Karabakh who had to take arms in self-defense or serve in the army. So this is also one of the reasons why international presence is very much needed, because Azerbaijan can arrest anyone on fake charges and keep them in detention. Azerbaijan till now keeps 36 prisoners of war since 2020, even though the sides agreed to give all for all, and Armenia has given to Azerbaijan all political prisoners of war that it had. Azerbaijan is still keeping 36. We have no idea what is the number of prisoners of war in these last days, but it is also at least in few dozens. In case of Georgia, I think at least what Georgian government or the Georgian people can do to push on their government is that we have seen in recent weeks and months how Azerbaijan is buying more and more weapons, and those weapons come mostly currently from Turkey and Israel. The data is there how the company belonging to Aliyev's family travels from military bases in Turkey and Israel to Azerbaijan. It is a civilian aviation. It flies over Georgia, violating its civilian aviation code, transporting military. And the Georgian government knows this very well, but it hasn't been prevented. That's at least one thing that can become part of the debate there.
Danke, Narek. Ich möchte jetzt gerne noch zwei Fragen aus dem Publikum.
Thank you, Narek. Zwei Fragen aus dem, two questions from the audience that I think are very important. I would like to repeat, and then Volker will maybe have a last round of statements. I question maybe Zsuzsannik and some others on the panel, a question that is too often ignored. Just let me find it. The question is, what about women in all these processes? Is there any mention of their competences and needs? How are we making sure that there is no gender violence? And are these any questions that play a role in diplomacy, a major role? The Foreign Office has a feminist, women-oriented foreign policy, and I think that's an important question that we also shine a light on these issues. Maybe Zsuzsannik and Robin on the role of women and how they are protected in this situation.
Zsuzsannik, magst du anfangen oder soll Robin anfangen?
Zsuzsannik, would you like to start? Or Robin?
Yeah, maybe I will start, but also pass the word to my colleague Narek, because maybe he will have more information on the security reasons, because as an INGO, we don't have this information and we don't have monitoring how this is happening there. We do follow the official information coming from the ombudsman's offices, but maybe Narek will cover this topic more than I can.
You're working concretely with women in the shelters in Goris. Are there special needs they tell you on a daily basis?
Yes, if we are talking about needs, sorry if I just misunderstood the question. Yes, it's really very a hard situation to tell, because all the women and also the rest of the people who are fleeing here, you know, the whole story and the whole need is starting in these almost 10 months, when they have very, very limited access to anything, any basic hygiene needs, any protection, psychological support, being mothers of soldiers, or who are not soldiers, but you know, who are they are baby boys, they are children in the kindergartens, in the schools, which are being a bit, you know, before these shellings, they could even hear some noises happening around, and each mother is really very, very sensitive, sitting home, and she doesn't know how to do and how to protect the children. And another thing, their educational limitations. They don't have, children don't have access to education. Everyone is home, and so much of stress here. So when they are coming here, and this all, you know, complex issues, when they were facing within these 10 months, and then following the 2 days of the shelling, and they don't know where are they men, where are their children in the schools. And then a couple of days in the very dark shelters, in the dust, in uncertainty, and then plus 1, 2, 3 days of the road passing to Orniz or to Armenia. This all is all about the stress and their role to protect their families. So it will be really very hard for me to specify which one is their first need, because it's the whole almost a year of suffering from their side. That's why we just start to filter the needs coming from the basic hygiene needs, and also trying to follow up with the chain and passing the work to the psychologists, to the doctors, just to everyone has its work to work with women to bring them to the life again back.
Vielen Dank. Robin, vielleicht dazu?
Thank you very much. Robin? Shoshanik spoke of the situation, and there's not a whole lot I can add to this. Now, this is a situation occurring now that people are fleeing. It's a situation that the people are also faced with. They remain in Nagorno-Karabakh, where it's also important to pay attention to their security. And it was also a situation during the times of the blockade that also went hand in hand with a whole set of challenges, a lack of supplies during birth and other things. So the situation is extremely problematic. And that is why it is important in our humanitarian aid to consider these aspects. I also think that it is important in our stabilization measures to pay close attention to the needs, but to also pay attention to the role, the potential stabilizing role of women in society. So, but of course, we have acute needs at the very moment. Allow me to add one further thing. The question was whether Russia has given up on the region. Some people are pondering over this question. My worry is what may really not arise, that we see the punishment of a government that is going down a democratic path, that is clearly orienting itself in a specific way, and that Russian commitment will only be valid as long as it likes the government. And that is why it is important to point to the fact that the Russian troops also played a role and were responsible. I spoke about that, but it is a worry that exists and that needs to be taken seriously. We'll have to see how much these commitments are worth and whether there is a destabilizing interest. One more question from the audience, and afterwards I'll give Volker the opportunity to ask any remaining questions that you have thought of. There's one question that we haven't spoken about a whole lot.
Die fragt Ben Reis.
Ben Reis is asking the
which
question in
role
English.
Does Iran play in this conflict? Would the regime in Tehran intervene in case of an invasion of Armenia proper? So I think this is also leading us to the question about, you know, what happens now, Western Azerbaijan, the whole discussion about the corridor. So what would be Iran's role in there? Would they accept it? Same actually for Turkey. What would be their role if that happened? And would they let it happen? Anyone? Tom, maybe? Yeah.
Just quickly, I mean, I think this is one reason. Obviously, we should be concerned about this issue of southern Armenia, the corridor, and so on. But I think the statements
ein Auge auf Südarmenien werfen.
one reason they do have a deterrent effect.
Aber die Aussagen, die gemacht wurden, haben eine abschreckende Wirkung. Es würde mich überraschen, wenn Aserbaidschan Gewalt einsetzt im Süden Armeniens. Natürlich sollten wir ganz vorsichtig darauf achten.
There are several deterrent effects. One is
aber es gibt unterschiedliche abschreckende Wirkungen. Das europäische Geld, die Warnungen des Iran. Auch die USA meldet sich, was dieses Thema angeht, zu Wort. Also, natürlich beobachten wir die Entwicklungen, aber das Hauptproblem befindet sich aktuell in Armenien selbst. Dürfte ich auch eine Frage stellen? Ich weiß, dass wir fast am Ende angekommen sind. Eine Frage an Narek und Shushanik. Wie ist es um die politische Stabilität in Armenien bestellt?
Shushanik? Okay, I'll go first then. The situation is in Armenia, in Yerevan, is not very stable. As rightly pointed out, we have numerous protests taking place on the streets of Yerevan. There are grassroots movements, smaller in their size, but also there is the bigger movement that is led by the parliamentary opposition, that is led not in the square, but politically, they are not present. That is led by the former two presidents of Armenia, Sukiasyan and Robert Kocheryan. Especially the later, for Robert Kocheryan, is known to be in better relations with the Kremlin. But we have seen these protests since 2020. After the end of the first war, when the negotiating dynamic was getting worse and worse for Armenia, these people were taking the streets. However, in all of these attempts, they failed to achieve a critical mass, to translate it into a political change, resignation of Pashinyan, or etc. The problem is, and this is very often misinterpreted in the West, that people, and I've heard this from diplomats saying that it seems that Armenian people were okay with the loss of Karabakh, otherwise why would they go and elect Pashinyan again? This happens because the disappointment, the disapproval among the population when it comes to the former presidents and the political forces that they represent is so high, they are so unacceptable to the wider masses of population that they may give their vote to the ruling party, to Pashinyan's government, in order not to have the return of those former presidents. And the political landscape is polarized. You don't have a third choice. It's either these or those. And this is not about Armenian people giving up Karabakh. This is not about Armenian people leaving their compatriots to dictatorial regime's fate. This is just an analysis among the popular folk that whoever comes won't do better than Pashinyan. And if the former presidents come, maybe it will be even worse when it comes to democracy and other things. So this is very often misinterpreted. So they haven't so far been able to, again, mobilize a critical mass. And I don't know where it will go. I mean, with protests, you can never predict. But that is the main reason why they haven't been successful. And again, coming to Russian factor, whenever you have Russian propagandists making comments on social media calling for protests against Pashinyan, that discourages protesters even more. It's completely counterproductive. So if it wasn't for this opposition and it wasn't for these influences, I would argue that Pashinyan's government would have lost power long ago, because it's not that they enjoy wide public trust. It's that all the alternatives people consider worse.
Okay. I think we come to an end here, Max. Is this right? And
ja, wir können gerne noch, ich möchte jetzt allen auf dem Panel noch die Gelegenheit geben.
I'd like to give everyone on the panel the possibility to make a closing statement. If there's anything else you'd like to say, 2 or 3 sentences for a maximum of half a minute. And Shoshanik is going to be the last to take the floor, so she can tell us what kind of support she needs on the ground, what donations can be made to support. I'd like to end that way. So perhaps we'll go the same way as we started. Narek, Tom, Robin, with their last statements, and then we'll finish with Shoshanik.
Very quickly.
Narek.
So should I start?
Yeah, but please start with kind of your last take.
I think the silver lining of what I presented today, and I deeply apologize if some of my comments were emotional. I think you can understand where that emotion comes from. And the silver lining of that is all of this that is happening was possible to prevent. All of this has been alarmed, has been explained, and Azerbaijan has never hidden its intentions. And this is going to continue, as I said, with Zangezur corridor that they demand from Armenia, with the demand of enclaves, with the demand of settlement of Azerbaijanis in Armenia. And all of these are direct threats, not only to the democracy of Armenia that we so much care about, but its physical existence. We need Armenia to physically exist in order to be able to support sustainable development and democracy here. However, it is much worse now, much difficult to do any prevention, because once you say you will not tolerate something and then you do tolerate that, which was Azerbaijan's aggression by the West, then your words mean less and less. So the time of words is over. It's time to act and immediately push forward with the sanctions on personal assets or economic sanctions against Azerbaijan. Nothing else has worked and will work.
Danke, Narek. Sehr klar.
Thank you, Narek. That was clear. Tom.
Yeah, I think everything has been said on the political side. So I just want to sort of close with some thoughts that and you know, commend the work that Shoshanik and also Robin are doing to help these poor people fleeing from their homes in Karabakh. I think it's a great tragedy, more than 30 years old, which is continuing, and it's so tragic to see people displaced from their homes. You know, let's not forget that hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijani people suffered in this fashion in the 1990s, and so we have I think there's a general failure in Western policy towards the South Caucasus to take it sufficiently seriously, and unfortunately, these yet another humanitarian catastrophe that we're seeing, one of many in this long conflict, is occurring. And I I'm glad to see the work you're doing and the German government is doing, but I think a lot more is required, and I hope the government of Germany will now step up and do a lot more. But thank you for having me.
Danke. Robin.
Aserbaidschan hat sich entschieden,
Azerbaijan decided to go down the route of a humanitarian crisis. The country decided to enforce itself with military violence, and Russia didn't step up. This isn't acceptable. We need to now clearly state that the rest of the process needs to be taking place on the negotiating table, and that no escalation is possible. This also entails examining what further possibilities exist to express this. When it comes to the acute needs, it's important to do everything to offer humanitarian help for the people at a local level. It's important to offer humanitarian aid to the people fleeing, and we need to ensure that there is a massive stabilization of the democratic government in Armenia. That too needs to be a focus area. Stabilization means long-term aid, including aid in 5 to 10 years. We need a long breath here, but we also need massive help now, immediately, so that it becomes visible. And stabilization explicitly also means securing the territorial integrity of Armenia. UN mission is very important in this context too. And I'd also like to thank everyone that is helping at a local level. Thank you to everyone helping in this terrible situation. And I'd also like to thank Europe Calling for organizing this seminar. I'd also like to thank DGO, because many things can happen in the world because we turn a blind eye as a German society, which is why it's important that all eyes are directed at Nagorno-Karabakh and that they remain there without going anywhere else. So thank you very much for this webinar. And I think we'll need a lot more of these formats to ensure that we raise awareness within German society. Thank you. Volker, would you like to say a few final words before we give the floor to Shoshanik? Before Shoshanik speaks, I'd like to say that I've said everything with regards to the politics, and I support what Narek has said. We need more engagement, clear things, but when it comes to humanitarian aid, before Shoshanik speaks, I'd like to say something about the organization she works for. People in Need is not just a small Czech organization. It is the most important European human rights organization in Eastern Europe. It is large, it is professional, also at the level of European diplomacy when it comes to the question how we can concretely help. When it comes to these questions, people in need is the answer, because they have the people on the ground. They have people like Shoshanik who know what needs to be done, and that is why these donations are at the right place. That's why I'd like to kindly ask everyone to donate, and I'd like to now give the floor to Shoshanik.
Thank you, Volker, for the words on people in need. I would really like, as a communication person also in a PIN, to be able to highlight one of the stories I have heard in these few days here in the field. But I'm really not able, because, as I said, the whole almost a year is starting with the same tragedy. But I would really like to use the opportunity just to invite all of the international media to feel it and just to write the stories of humans or civilians, how they are suffering from politics or from anything, you know. And that would be the best, just people be safe everywhere, and people in need do not exist in everywhere to support people. So I'm waiting for you here, ready to be a host here, and you can invite all the journalists to see what is happening here.
Danke dir. Da sind auch viele heute von dabei im Publikum. Ich hoffe.
We have many journalists in our audience, so hopefully you'll get emails and calls, and hopefully also many donations. I too would like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank the audience. for joining in and for asking questions. We couldn't answer all the questions. We had over 400 people here, which is good, and we need to ensure that we continue focusing on this and that it doesn't disappear. Have a very good evening. Lots of strength to Armenia and Karabakh during these difficult times. I wish you the very best and see you next time at Your Calling.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dankeschön.